It is my pleasure to start our second seminar of this year, Testimonies from the War Research Seminar Series. And this one is going to be in English, but I guess that Viktoriya will accept questions in Ukrainian and in Polish.
Polish as well.
Yeah, so feel free to change the language if you feel more convenient with Polish or Ukrainian. And I'm glad we managed to invite Viktoriya because the date was negotiated for a couple of weeks, and I'm looking forward to finally hear your talk about a very interesting research. And this talk is part of the series of talks with scholars who do something similar to what we do. We learn a lot from our fellow colleagues, and we are very eager to hear about the research that somehow talks with what we are doing on within our UCOR and earlier Testimonies from the War project. So Viktoriya will be talking about the overlooked minorities that were also experienced by the Russian aggression and experienced the war-induced displacement and migration. And I was thinking about how many of the representatives of various minority groups we in fact have among our first round of interviews. And we have few of our interviewers in the room, so they might also join in later and explain. But I think that we only managed to have few people of Crimean Tatar ethnic identity, and few people who mentioned their Polish origins, but that was a bit questionable. I'm not counting the still mixed Ukrainian-Russian identities, and I think there was someone from Chechnya in the first round recorded in Poland. There were some people recorded by Ukrainian team from other ethnic minorities or other ethnic groups that were living in Ukraine and that were affected by the war. But anyway, this is the field that we are not covering. So I'm very interested in the outcomes of your research. So we are having Viktoriya Sereda with us today, and I will introduce Viktoriya shortly. So Viktoriya is a sociologist. She's a head coordinator of the Wilczur Ukraine Institute for Advanced Studies at the Wissenschaftskolleg to Berlin, and also senior advisor of the project Prisma Ukraïna, War, Migration and Memory of the Forum Transregionale Studien. And since 2020, she has also been a senior research fellow at the Institute of Ethnology of the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine, and a professor in the Department of Sociology at the Ukrainian Catholic University. In the spring semester of 2021, she was a visiting lecturer at the University of Basel, and from 2011 to 2017, she was the head of the sociological team for the project Region, Nation and Beyond, an interdisciplinary and transcultural reconceptualization of Ukraine, organized by the University of St. Gallen in Switzerland. And I think that many of you are familiar with the results of this well-known project. In 2016, 17, and then later 1920, she was also a research fellow at the Ukrainian Research Institute at Harvard University, where she developed a digital atlas of social changes in Ukraine after the Euromaidan. So Viktoriya is experienced sociologist with a great expertise of empirical research. Our project is, I think, more interdisciplinary, meaning that we have sociologists, but also many historians and oral historians and some anthropologists. So we are looking forward to your talk, and we are going to, I hope, discover many links between our research. So the floor is yours, and I think that you have more or less 30 minutes, and then we'll proceed to the questions from the audience.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this talk, and I've been watching and listening to many presentations connected to your project as well, because this project is of a great interest to me as a scholar, and it's a also unique project for me. So I believe I would be, or we will be seeing each other during your seminar many more times. And when I was thinking today what to talk about today, because I had different focuses and studies beginning from 2014. I'm in the field first studying displaced within the Ukraine, and then also people who left Ukraine, and since 2022 also those who are going outside of the country into different destinations. And what I'll be talking today with you about is also part of this project, which was named by Anna, this War, Migration and Memory. This is an umbrella topic for a big research group. And one of the colleagues who was there with it, and still is there within this group, is Mykola Humaniuk, who is sociologist and geographer from the Kherson. And when we were talking about what is his focus, what is he is doing and mine, and then at certain point we saw that it clinked, because we were focusing and doing interviews with a similar group, so with similar minorities, and we decided to share our experience, to write a text which will be published. They promised to publish it by summer, but now the time is December, but this is and will be also a text. And why those minorities? Because if we're talking about minorities in Ukraine, quite often the focus is still on this so-called traditional minorities. And of course, we may be a little bit more aware of Crimean Tatars, again, since 2014, since they had to flee Crimea after the annexation. But less is studied about Roma, and even less about Turk Meskhetian, so Ahiska Turks. So I will try today to talk exactly about these groups, and they have certain things in common. But what is first of all important for us to remember that Ukraine is a country with both religious and ethnic pluralism, with a lot of groups. And when we are talking about experiences of war, exactly, it's important not to forget about that we are not talking about one big unanimous group, but we are talking about experiences or focusing on experiences of different groups. So what is also important for me when we are looking, so I'm trying to approach my today's talks, looking at the texts or looking at how the migration governments and response of migration governments to Ukrainian displacement outside of the country. And if we look at the documents connected to refugee and asylum seekers, we see that they are focusing, and they are all written in the language of protection and global public good and support. But then if we look how the situation is unfolding locally at different receiving countries, then we observe that there is a lot of, in the discourses or media, political discourses of those countries, especially we observe it a lot in EU recently, that we have questions of logic of rescue, using the Jane Kim's term, and also solvability. So certain groups are seen as more to support or deserving being rescued, or deserving being granted the refugee status, or being granted some other statuses, and others are not. And we also can use the Stephen Kessel's approach, when he is talking about the global inequality of citizenship. So we do have universal law and universal conventions, but then in real life, of course, we do have a very different situation. And I try to use Ukrainian minority refugee groups, and very specific one as a lens for me. Again, to give you example why it's important to speak about this different approach to refugees is the issue of weaponization of refugees, when quite often states are using refugees for political benefits, for economical benefits, or even to prove why they should start a new war of full-scale invasion, as it was in the case of Russia. And when we are talking about Ukraine, we see that since 2014, focus first was on internally displaced, and later when we are talking since 2022, again, most of the publication go along the axis east-west. So those who went to Russia, or those who are in Russia, or deported to Russia, and EU. However, there is another direction which is very important for us, and this the south direction, the Turkey, which is much less discussed. If to look at the methodology of this particular text or this particular study, what we employed was multi-level and mixed methods. So we did a lot of desk research to look at the migration government's responses adopted by Turkish government beginning from 2014 till 2022. Also to look a little bit at description of displacement destinations, yes, and particularly south destination, to try to understand what are the numbers of people of each group moving towards south. We also did apply the qualitative data, and we had quite a variety of data sets to use. And these were in-depth interviews with Crimean Tatars, Ahiska or Meskhetian Turks, and Roma conducted by me or Mykola in between 2014 and 2023. And they were conducted both in Ukraine and also with those who left Ukraine for Turkey. And also several interviews were conducted, especially with Crimean Tatars, in other countries. Why? Because they first moved to Turkey and then they had to resettle or leave the Turkey. So I was conducting interviews with them in Germany and Poland. So this is the list of different sets of interviews. And what was important for me on my side, that what we did with, and a lot of them we conducted together, or these were projects which we did together with Oksana Mikheeva, we always use the same set of questions, or this core of questions. So in this case, we could compare the material which we were gathering at different time points with different IDP groups within the Ukraine, or those who were, as I said, were outside of Ukraine, in Poland, Crimean Tatars, or in Germany. And for us, it was very important to keep this element, or this part, to be able to compare the data from different data sets. And Mykola Homanyuk was also working on his part. He did interviews with all three groups on the territory of Kherson Oblast, and then followed up some of them, especially Roma and Ahiska Turks, when they moved to Turkey. So then after 2023. So if we're talking about Turkey, Turkey is a very specific country in terms of minority rights or migration. because the definition of migrant in the Turkish legislation is very much connected to the old law, to the citizenship law and settlement law from 1934, and is connected to ethnic origin. So the migrant status is only granted to those groups or refugees or people fleeing to the country who are recognized of the Turkish origin. And the problem is that this law in 2034 did not describe exactly or precisely what are the groups. So this was up and still is up to discretion of the Turkish government to decide which group of refugees fleeing to Turkey could be granted this or could be exempt. So at the moment of annexation of Crimea, when Crimean Tatars started to flee to Turkey, they were not part of this list. But Meskhetian Turks were part of the list, and this really influenced the situation. Then, if we are talking about asylum seeking or real refugee status, again, the situation is extremely complex because Turkey signed the convention, but with exemptions, saying that only those who are coming from the Europe could be granted the status of asylum seekers. And then Turkish government negotiated with EU after 2014 a special deal when the Syrian refugees were exactly put under Turkish national law. So they are seen as refugees, but this refugee status, because they are not fleeing from Europe, is not equal to other asylum seeker statuses which we were used to deal with in EU, on the EU territory. And what is very interesting that Crimean Tatars were fleeing from Europe. But if you look at the statistics both collected about the refugees by Turkish government and also by Eurostat, we couldn't find a single person from Ukraine or with Ukrainian citizenship who was granted the status, which means that the law exists, but it is never applied to Ukrainian citizens who are Crimean Tatars. And we have three groups. Why I'll be talking about Roma as well, because we have in Ukraine we have a Roma group which is Muslim and also Turkish speaking. So first of all, the first group, which is important for us and the most numerous one, is Crimean Tatars, and who started to flee to Turkey beginning from the 18th century, from when Crimea became part of the Russian Empire. And they shaped a very big minority group within the Turkish society. And also we do remember that the Crimean Tatars were deported together with other minority groups from Crimea by Stalin, and then gradually they were given a right to return to Crimea only after the beginning of Perestroika. So in 2020, Ukrainian embassy in Turkey provided a very vague estimate of what is the Crimean Tatar diaspora in Turkey. And this is very important to keep in mind, because if people started to flee 150 years ago, of course, a lot of them assimilated, as a lot of them are not considering them any longer a Crimean Tatar diaspora. But rough estimate was between 1.5 to 3 million, without specifying the number of those Crimean Tatars who already managed to flee from Crimea after 2014. the Ahiska or Meskhetian Turks is another very interesting group who were also deported by Stalin regime, but from Georgia. And they were settled in Uzbekistan. Quite often, these were mixed placements of settlement, and they quite often stayed together with Crimean Tatars, or nearby. The settlements were either mixed or nearby in Uzbekistan. And then in 1988, they were forced to leave again because there was a conflict in Uzbekistan, and they went in through there were three routes of resettlement: to Russia, to Azerbaijan, and to Ukraine. And then another small group of Ahiska Turks moved from Krasnodar region of Russia to United States. So there is also a small diaspora group of Ahiska Turks in US. So by 2010, there were around 10,000 Ahiska Turks who settled in Ukraine, exactly in Kherson region, and also some of them in Donetsk and Mykolaiv Oblast. And during the interviews conducted with them on the territory of their settlements in Ukraine, they were saying that actually it's very difficult for them to localize their homeland. Some of them were still talking that their main homeland is Georgia. Others were claiming Turkey, and many of them were also saying that Ottoman Empire as a wider space or imagined space of post-Soviet territories. But for many of them were claiming also belonging to Ukrainian political nation, that they also very much feel part of Ukrainian society, that they feel Ukrainians. And we can say that with the beginning of the full-scale invasion, Turkey immediately started the rescue operation of Ahiska Turks. So they reached to the group, they helped them to resettle, and Ahiska Turks are recognized as a group of Turkish origin, so they immediately got all the privileges of the migration status, long-term permits, possibilities to work, and many more. So at that point, after 2014, the estimate of number of people who moved to Turkey was around 2,600. And you can find a lot of data or publications in Turkish media about this. So they were very much assisted. And again, the same was true after 2022. With the full-scale invasion, because exactly those territories which we localize as the most settled by Ahiska Turks in Ukraine, they were occupied by Russians, and many of them already in mid-April were assisted to move to Turkey. So again, the rough number given by Turkish government is that by the end of 22, around 8,000 Ahiska Turks were moved from those territories to the territory of Turkey. For us, it's very interesting to also to see how Turkish government is or where they are settled first of all, and you can see on the map the localities where they are sent to or settled to. And what is very important, if we look, then we observe that actually both parts belong to Eastern Anatolia, the provinces where the majority of population or big shares of populations are made by Kurds and Daza Kurds. So in this sense, we can also see that Turkish government is not only rescuing the Meskhetian Turks, but is using them for the management of internal otherness within the country. And worrying attitude to this is that actually this might create additional conflicts within the Turkey, and Turks Meskhetians could again become victims of those conflicts because they are seen as a group supported by the Turkish government to manage otherness of the Kurds or of this territory. If we look at the situation with Crimean Tatars, it's, as I said, much more difficult. Why? Because the Crimean Tatars didn't have those privileges, so they were fleeing to Turkey. We have the rough estimates of people who fled to Turkey by 2020. But again, in majority, what we see that those who are fleeing, they had a short-term residence rights. And this means that exactly because Crimean Tatars were not granted those privileges, they entered the Turkey and were allowed to stay in the Turkish territories under very specific conditions. And these are very tough conditions for anybody who wants to resettle to Turkey. So many of my interviewed interlocutors were saying that they came to the Turkey because of the closeness of culture and language and in a sense identities, but they were shocked because they could not find they could not bureaucratically fit into any group, and they were not helped, and many of them had to leave Turkey either to return back to Ukraine or to move to some other countries, including EU, because of this attitude. After 2022, again, a lot of those Crimean Tatars who were fleeing from after the annexation of Crimea and try to settle somewhere closer to Crimea in Kherson and Mykolaiv region, again had to evacuate. Some of them found themselves under occupation. So one of the possible routes was to Turkey. But unfortunately, till August 22, after when finally the Crimean Tatar diaspora managed to gain an agreement with Turkish Directorate of Migration Management, when finally Crimean Tatars were granted also this right of Turkish of a group of Turkish ancestry, they were again facing a lot of issues connected to the possibility to settle to resettle to Turkey. And the final group I wanted to talk today about is Roma, and here I would mention two groups. One of them are Servuria or Serv and Crimea. So both were living on the territories of which were under attack. First one was living mostly on Donbass, Servuria, and they were quite often known as the name of Ukrainian Roma or Khokhly among the Roma population, because they were Russian or Ukrainian speaking, Orthodox, and exactly were located in the Donbass territories. But majority of this group found themselves under occupation. And especially after with the COVID pandemic, they were very much trapped within the borders of this region and couldn't move, so and strongly immobilized by different governments. So in this sense, they lost the importance to the Roma community of Ukraine and had to flee very different and all possible directions. The Crimea were living exactly also in Crimean Peninsula and in Kherson, Zaporizhia, Mykolaiv, Odessa, so southern parts of Ukraine. They, as I said, were Turkish-speaking and Muslim group of Roma, but they when we conducted interviews with them, they claimed that they didn't want to go to Turkey and didn't see the Turkey as a possible destination. Why? Because Turkey has a very strong anti-Roma government, and a lot of stereotypes and prejudice and othering is happening there. So also culturally, they were much closer to those both groups, Crimean Tatars and Turks Meskhetians, who were moving to Turkey. They choose another destination, mainly Poland, Czech Republic, and Germany. So in this sense, to conclude, we do observe that it's very important that ethnic origin or ethno-religious affiliation of the minority group can very much influence the experiences of displacement and experiences of war, either being additionally assisted or become, it could also become a source of additional discrimination. And we also can see that Turkey adopts a strategy of very selective preferences toward Ukrainian refugees, exactly based on their ethnic and religious origin. And I would stop here. I maybe also share with you one more slide about the new publications which are focusing on different minorities, and also those which I was talking today about. So the European Yearly Book of Minority Issues, as I said, was supposed to appear in summer. It will appear in December. Then another important and very interesting book, which is co-edited by Elmira Muratova and Nadia Zasanska, Minorities at War. And here I'm also presenting a collective volume, which will appear in transcript from the project I was leading, War, Migration and Memory, and we will have a separate chapter with a focus again on Roma and Crimean Tatars there. And the final one is my publication about displacement within the Ukraine, mostly internally displaced, where also there is a big part with a focus on Crimean Tatars and their experiences.
Thank you so much, Viktoriya, for your talk. I have a list of questions, but I won't be. I don't want to be the first one to start. So I will now open the floor to the audience. You may simply unmute yourself and start if you have any questions to Viktoriya, and I believe you should have some.
Any language, Ukrainian, Polish, English.
Okay, I can start maybe, yeah. At first, thank you very much for your fascinating talk. And my question would be more about German society than Ukrainian society, because I have heard that you have interviews with these people in Germany, for example, and Poland and Czech Republic, but I'm interested in Germany. And there is a discussion in Germany today that refugees from Ukraine compared to refugees from the Middle East have been accepted much better by German society. And this is usually attributed to open or hidden racism about Germans. And do you see any differences in the attitude of the host society towards refugees from Ukraine of different ethnic origins? For example, Ukrainians and Roma or others. And if so, what are the reasons for it? Your ideas.
So first of all, if we look at especially media publications, exactly the issue of problem or question for me is that these groups are not seen or are not differentiated. And this is similar as previously we've heard about just Syrian refugees or Iranian refugees or Afghani refugees or Ukrainian refugees, without understanding that actually behind this generalized term are very different ethno-religious groups and many others, because it's not minorities could be understood in many more different ways. So in this sense, I see very little discussion about the diversity of Ukrainians as a refugee group. But what I observed, and there are publications and there are studies which are focusing on Roma and Roma discrimination, because there were facts of Roma discrimination both in Czech Republic, in Poland, and in Germany as well. So Germany is not an exception. We also, I hear very little discussions, or I don't see in media that someone would discuss Muslim groups of Ukrainian minorities, such as Crimean Tatars or, for example, Turk Meskhetians. If we are talking about privileged positions, again, I guess there are some debates and discussions more within the academic communities than within media or political groups, which say that yes, of course, cultural and religious closeness matters, but at the same time, the status which is granted also matters, and temporary protection status has a lot of limitations and also has its influence on, for example, access to the job market. So this is important issue to keep in mind when we are discussing the different refugee groups.
So the main discrimination is about work market, yes, that we can see from these interviews. Yeah, because the status is the same. All people with Ukrainian passports have the same status, but we can see this different attitude only from these interviews when this Roma, for example, are speaking about home society, and they can speak that it is different from other Ukrainians.
With Roma, they in those interviews they claimed and described the issues that they were not allowed to, or the entrance was crossing the border was problematic one, yes, and then also when they approaching local bureaucracies, they also were facing some additional issues or difficulties connected, that they try to say that, you know, passports are stolen, something like this. But we are talking about the everyday bureaucracy here, yes. And of course, with the job market, again, when we are talking about minority, Roma minority, this is important issue for them.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to jump in to say that there is a very promising research project that has been being implemented in Poland, that has just started, I think, in the spring, and it's being conducted by Polish and Czech teams with the participation of the Ukrainian team, because as in case of our Polish, Ukrainian and Luxembourgish cooperation, the funding schemes do not prioritize participation of Ukrainian teams in anything funded by the European Union. So formally, it is a project implemented by the Czech and Polish team, but the Ukrainians are there, and it's precisely about the displaced Roma communities I think only after 2022. In the Czech Republic and in Poland, and I don't see anyone from the project today, but I mean, I might contact you. It's Ignacy Jóźwik and Kamila Fiałkowska, and they are doing really good research on how the Roma community was displaced to Poland and received in Poland. And there is also, I mean, there are also it's kind of community-oriented or participatory-oriented. So there are people from the Roma community, from inside, also taking part in this project as scholars, but also as kind of the sophisticated gatekeepers. So I might kind of connect you later.
Yeah, thank you. And just to give you a little bit teaser, those who might be in Berlin, Mykola Homoniuk and his team, because he is also active in creating this specific theatrical plays based on interviews, and exactly next weekend there will be several plays in Berlin about Roma community experiences of war based on those interviews. So they are using some excerpts from those interviews and creating a play, monoplay, or like there are 2 or 3 people in the play. Extremely interesting. And for me, it is also interesting how we scholars who work in the field and conduct interviews also can popularize and inform about the situation of minority group in different way.
Okay, so I have a question. I was actually I have 2, but I will start with one. So I was thinking about this Crimean Tatars who were surprised that they did not find in Turkey what they expected. I mean, that they expected to feel more at home in Turkey than they actually felt in the end. This is what I understood from your talk, that they thought it's going to be easier because there are these cultural connections. So they didn't find these cultural connections, right? They expected more, or they overestimated their acculturation to the, I don't know, imagined Turkish culture. What was this reason of disappointment?
So first of all, because before the annexation of Crimea, Turkey was very actively supporting the renaissance of Crimean Tatar culture in Crimea. Yes, so they were supporting both religiously but also culturally, and investing a lot in this. So in this sense, they also had this feeling that there is a neighbor with whom we are linguistically and culturally close, and also because there is a big diaspora, Crimean Tatar diaspora. And in those interviews, they were also saying that shock for them was that this Crimean Tatar diaspora was not as supportive as they expected to be. And of course, those of us who know or study diasporas, long-term diasporas, I know Ukrainian diaspora in US, or we also know about different waves of people, yes, and clashes between those waves of diasporas fleeing. So in this sense, they thought that there would be much more support for them, but situation was extremely difficult, and they also had to compete strongly on the labor market with Syrian refugees who had this temporary protection status, which allowed them to work in Turkey, and for Turkish government this was very important source of cheap labor. But having a very strong difficulties with getting long-term term permits, and in Turkey you can get a long-term permit only after staying on the territory for 8 years. So if you're having difficulties finding job and accommodating, this is really very difficult to live. So, and in these interviews, people were desperately saying that we understand the language, we speak the language, but somehow many of them are also religious Muslims who follow certain rituals or holidays, but they felt much more othered than they expected.
Did you manage to learn what are their plans? I mean, do they intend to stay?
Now situation is different, of course, and this is the similar with all refugee groups moving to another countries. Both Turks, Meskhetians, and Crimean Tatars were claiming that they intend to return to Ukraine, especially to Crimea, because for Crimean Tatars, this is their indigenous land. But the question is for how long the war will last and occupation of Crimea will last. And in those interviews, for example, Turk Meskhetians were also complaining that they feel a little bit pressure from the Turkish government that they have to show their Turkishness stronger, and that this is not always the case, but because government so much invested in moving them and rescuing, helping them, then there was a certain push to demonstrate their Turkishness, and for them this was a problematic issue because of the sense of belonging, and they didn't feel really strongly connected to Turkey, as strong as they were. So, for example, they were saying that we are hoisting the flags to mark certain loyalty, but we still feel strong loyalty with Ukraine. And for them, another important issue is also ecological situation. Why? Because the way of living, and they majority of them were living in the countryside with specific agricultural activities, and after the destruction of Kakhovka, now it became very difficult or impossible for them to conduct this agricultural activities and way of life. And also because of the military actions, a lot of their villages were completely destroyed. So this is also the question: return to where?
It's interesting because it sounds as if, I mean, there is a huge potential conflict of loyalties among these people. I mean, what you are talking about sounds like you need to repay the help you received with showing this sense of Turkishness a bit, and you might be more or less happy with that.
We have to understand that they are navigating within the autocratic regime as well.
Yeah.
So there is a much less democracy and freedom of an expression of thoughts or what they think. For example, I had already recruited people for interviews in 2016 in Turkey for Crimean Tatars, and then there was a coup, and after that coup, all my respondents refused to talk. So they said, it's dangerous, we don't want to give any interviews. So we have to understand also that the political situation is different there.
And were people who first left to Turkey and then moved somewhere else, and you interviewed them somewhere else, were they more open about the difficulties they faced in Turkey?
This is how,
Okay.
because I was
Okay.
actually, I start my personal research focus. I was doing interviews in Germany. So my idea was to do interviews with people who moved to Germany, to Poland, and I wanted to have in my sample Crimean Tatars, because this was how it was structured. And then after 2 or 3 interviews, I learned with surprise that what is happening in Turkey, and then I decided that it would be very important for me to find a way to conduct interviews in Turkey as well.
Thank you.
Ja chciałam się zapytać, Wiktoria, o taką rzecz. Czy społeczność Tatarów krymskich w jakikolwiek sposób była w społeczeństwie tureckim identyfikowana jako właśnie ta grupa? Czy oni przyjeżdżali i mieli taki sam status jak wszyscy inni Ukraińcy? Bo w naszych na przykład wywiadach mnie się akurat przytrafił wywiad z Tatarką krymską, która mówiła, że nie ma sensu właściwie jechać do Turcji, bo Turcy nie są przyjaźni Tatarom i oni zdecydowali, że jadą do Polski, bo mieli doświadczenie właśnie z pobytem w Polsce i stereotyp Tatara, aczkolwiek raczej Tatara, który mieszka gdzieś na północno, na Podlasiu powiedzmy, stereotyp Tatara w Polsce jest pozytywny. I oni to postrzegali, że w Polsce rzeczywiście ta ich sytuacja, chociażby związana z przyznawaniem się na przykład do korzeni krymsko-tatarskich, daje im jakieś chociaż takie stereotypowe plusy. A w przypadku Turcji, no jakby, ja nie wiem właśnie na ile oni, chciałam się zapytać, czy oni w ogóle byli jakkolwiek preferencyjnie lepiej traktowani przez Turków, bo wydaje mi się, że wręcz przeciwnie i dlatego często wybierali właśnie inne kierunki, na przykład Polskę. Myślę, że też dla Turcji przecież zbytnie nasycenie migrantami, także rosyjskimi, może też być jakoś skutkować tym, że Tatarzy krymscy nie czuli się tam po prostu zbyt dobrze w Turcji. Czy jeszcze raz, czy identyfikowaliście jakiś inny status dla Tatarów w porównaniu z Ukraińcami, którzy być może też migrowali na teren Turcji? Czy...
This status was more connected still to the presence of diaspora and also very rather expensive labor migration to Turkey. So, and this is exactly, we observe the same about people fleeing to Poland, to other countries, that if there is someone to get to, and in reality, after 2014, Crimean Tatar diaspora was not so much mobilized in support, but after 2022, they are very actively mobilized, and this was because of their pressure. Then Turkish government first was also helping Crimean Tatars to escape, and finally granted them support. So situation changed with the full-scale invasion of Russia.
I will maybe follow this question. I was wondering when Kasia asked her question about the previously existing diaspora networks and migration networks, because what worked out quite well in Poland was that, as in all kinds of migration, war-induced or not connected to the war at all, you tend to go where you have someone, and you tend to prefer the country where your aunt has been for 2 years ago, and there is someone who can provide you with some help, with some information, with a flat and so on. So I was thinking about how much it worked, for example, for the Crimean Tatars in Turkey. So if they were arriving in Turkey, were they finding like temporary host families among the Crimean Tatars families who were living there already before 2022, or it didn't matter and they were using the generally available scams of help? Or
it worked in many cases, but again, as you said, the number of refugees on the territory of Turkey is such a great, then it's very difficult, because the hosting or receiving society has also a huge number of Syrian and other refugees actively seeking for jobs and for bureaucratic support, or getting, if possible, different statuses, of course, with many limitations. And their temporary protection rights, for example, for Syrian refugees was different. They were allowed to get jobs, but they could not apply. Only the employee could apply on their behalf, which also created a lot of abuse, economic abuse, and of those migrants, because they would become very much depend on the employee. And Crimean Tatars were complaining that in their situation, because they could not have this long-term permits, this also was very much the situation when they are very much dependent on employees, and they are strongly competing for even very low paid jobs.
I did have a question, but I don't want to monopolize the floor. Okay, so I have the question about the methodology and the kind of internal setting of your research, because what you mentioned corresponds a lot with what I think we are doing or experiencing or facing, probably problems also in our project. You mentioned that you were working closely with Oksana Mikhayeva, and you used this set of core questions, which was common for your research and her research, and then you could use this data and exchange them, which is very useful, because I mean, qualitative research is time consuming and effort consuming. So if you can add some individual research projects, it really helps to have more detailed set of data. So we are maybe not doing the same, but our project started as the loosely affiliated, as the initiative of the loosely affiliated groups or teams, and we until now we didn't have a common funding, and even now there is a group working in Germany, which is, we don't have a common funding, but we are using the same questionnaire with this core questions set, which is really, really useful. And even if we can't fully make use of that now because of all these formal issues, absent data sharing agreements, it might happen in the future, and it's very, very important for us. So my question for you would be about this research internal kitchen, or the research backstage. How do you deal with working with fellow researchers and with using this multiple data? how do you navigate in this situation?
I would maybe share exactly experience of this next round of this war, migration and memory, because this was very ad hoc, the support initiative, where there were 6 scholars in Ukraine and several scholars in Germany connected by the umbrella topic, and they were of very different disciplinary origin. But absolute majority claimed that they want to collect interviews because they wanted to reflect on what is happening with the full-scale invasion, with experiences either within Ukraine or outside of Ukraine. And also I had to organize, so we had rounds of discussions, first of all, about how to conduct, so ethical issues, tools and everything. And I immediately opted and I said, we are coming from very different angles, and you have your individual projects, but I would advise that we could come up with several core questions, which everybody will ask. And then in the future, we create archive of our interviews, internal, only for this research group. But then we can use interviews conducted by other scholars for writing our own research and so on. It was very difficult to come up with such questions, exactly because disciplinary difference and focuses of the project. But finally we came with 4 or 5, and it really helped, because it still it gave a great potential later on for everybody to use if necessary, to use everyone's interviews, and having at least some part of bigger part in common, and then build up on what they were interested in. And I believe we are looking for a possibility to make it an archive and share it with some, I don't know, in the future, post it somewhere in the future. And I think this core element is extremely important because it holds together the whole collection.
Do you ask your interviewees about about the possibility of further archiving in the future? I mean, the problem in our project is that from the very beginning we had the archive as the main goal. That everything started as the documentation initiative and not as the research project, which is kind of the other way around. But we didn't have the archive when we started, and we don't have it yet. We need to find one, and we will by the end of the currently funded project. But right now we are asking for a lot of trust from the side of our interviewees, because what we are telling them is that look, guys, we are going to archive your testimony in some safe and nice place, but we don't know where exactly now. So please agree for everything or for something that you prefer, but we actually can't tell you where it will be deposited. And it's probably also your case. You don't know where.
Not yet. And we also understand that it requires, because we didn't have this incentive, so we had quite open or wide informed consent, but we didn't have it. But after we collected, we realized that this is actually very great and very important collection for a future, and then that probably we should archive it and preserve it for other scholars in the future. But then there are a lot of ethical and many more issues, how to work with the text, how to anonymize, to still make them logical, because you can anonymize, but at the same time, then it would not any longer tell you anything, yes? Because if you delete all possible threatening items or elements, then it's no longer recognizable where people from and what they are talking about. So these are questions which we don't have answers yet, and I guess it's important to think and talk through and gradually look at others examples and step by step to finding some solutions.
But do you ask them for possibility to keep their first and last name, or it's anonymized by default as a research project?
Anonymized, but yes,
Anonymized by default.
Yes, we said that it would be by default anonymized, but you can tell these people, but then if someone says, I was born in the village, blah, 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 and I went to school or I don't know, I was born in Kharkiv and I went to school number so and so and something like this, it's traceable. So many things are traceable, or they are telling about, I don't know, their relatives or connections. So it's very important to be very careful about this.
I think we had kind of a taste of this experience when Aleona, can I share the story about your job interview?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so you might also jump in. So Aleona is employed as a postdoc in our project, and when we were interviewing people, we wanted to learn what these people might be willing to do with our interviews, because it's analytical job. So we prepared a set of 3, in our understanding, anonymized interviews. And during the interview, Aleona immediately said that if only she wanted, she would de-anonymize this woman within few seconds. Maybe not few seconds, but it would happen without any problems.
Yeah, exactly. Especially if someone is in the field and either conducts with certain group interviews or has an experience, it's much more difficult to hid.
Yeah, exactly.
And
I think we'll have a separate seminar about the further archiving decisions and the entire issue of anonymization and pseudonymization and all these activities that might be taken to protect the identity of or maybe not even the identity, but about the well-being and safety of our interviews. But for now, I just want to say that in our project, we give some possible options to each interviewee, and there's an option to keep the full identity in the interview, and then later in the archive. So the first name, the last name, everything that was in the interview is going to stay. And then the second option is that okay, we are taking away your last name and your first name also if you want to, but then everything else is there. And then the third option is that a very theoretical option is that we are obliged to take away every single information that enables you to identify this person, but it's going to be problematic. Fortunately, not so many people ask for this option, because first it's a huge amount of job of work. I mean, it's going to be time consuming, and also it would either demand some technological skills to I don't know, either to blur the I don't know, maybe not to blur the voice, but to you know, to extract the pieces of the interview where, I don't know, the name of your mother-in-law is mentioned, because it's also a personal data that might allow someone from the field to identify you. Or you decide that you only archive the transcript, but then it's, I mean, really you're losing a lot. You're losing the voice, you're losing the structure of the talk, and it's not, I mean,
Emotions.
yeah, emotions. Not everybody agrees that what we are doing is oral history, but then it's not oral history anymore without the recording at all. So there are many decisions that we are going to face in the future.
So we will keep up with following your group.
Yeah, you are
And
very much invited, and keep us updated about what's happening with your decisions and your choices.
so is there any last moment questions?
Thank you.
Then thank you very much for inviting me to the seminar. And you have, Anna has my email, so if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them or consult you on certain topics.
Yes, thank you very
much for
Yeah, we-
coming.
for new presentations with the new results of your research. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, and yeah, thank you
Thank you.
for much for
Thank you so
coming,
much.
and we'll stay in touch, and good luck in your research.